The office was quiet that morning in the way only corporate buildings are before 9. Not peaceful, just muted. I arrived early, as usual. Same time every day, same elevator, same third-floor hallway with the carpet that never quite lost the smell of industrial cleaner. I set my bag down, powered on my computer, and placed my notebook beside the keyboard. The notebook mattered more than it looked. Black cover, no logo, no decoration. Just dates, times, names, and short sentences written carefully over years. I had learned a long time ago that memory is unreliable. Paper isn't. At 8:17 a.m., an email arrived. No subject line, just my name in the greeting. Jordan, can you stop by conference room C at 10 SAR? Quick discussion. It was signed by Vanessa, director of operations. She'd been promoted 2 years earlier, not because she was exceptional, but because she was visible, confident, comfortable taking credit in rooms full of people who didn't know the details. I replied with one word. Sure. Nothing about the email suggested urgency. Nothing suggested conflict. It read like every other meeting request I'd received in my 9 years at the company. That was the pattern, really. Everything always sounded reasonable at first. I spent the next hour reviewing reports, answering routine messages, and updating a compliance checklist that no one ever asked about, until something went wrong. Then suddenly, it mattered a great deal who had been quiet and thorough. At 9:55, I closed my notebook and walked to conference room C. Vanessa was already there, seated at the head of the table. A printed agenda sat in front of her. Across from her was my manager Paul, flipping through his phone. Legal wasn't present. HR wasn't present. That told me more than the agenda ever could. Jordan, Vanessa said, smiling professionally. Thanks for coming. Of course, I thought. I always came. She gestured for me to sit. I did. The meeting started the way they all did. Soft, polite, procedural. We're doing a review of operational efficiencies, she said. Nothing personal, just making sure roles align with evolving priorities. I nodded once. No notes yet. Paul added, this is just housekeeping. Housekeeping was one of those words that meant the opposite of what it suggested. Vanessa slid a document across the table. A revised responsibility matrix. My name appeared often, but not where it used to. Tasks I'd handled for years, financial oversight, vendor approvals, compliance sign-offs, were now listed under temporary shared responsibility. Temporary was another word I'd learned to read carefully. This doesn't change your title, Vanessa said quickly. It's just a redistribution of access, streamlining. I scanned the document slowly, deliberately. Some of the access removals didn't make sense. Others did, but only if you assumed someone else would pick them up. No one had been named. When does this take effect? I asked. End of day, she replied. It's already queued the changes. I looked up at her. She met my eyes calmly. No hostility, no tension, just confidence. Paul shifted slightly. Any concerns? I closed the folder and placed it neatly on the table. No, I said. And that was true. I didn't have concerns. I had observations. Vanessa smiled again. Great. Then we're aligned. The meeting ended at 10:12. No raised voices, no accusations, no argument to replay later. That was important. Back at my desk, I opened my notebook. October 12th, 10 a.m. Access Redistribution Meeting. Operational authority reassigned without legal present. No successor named. I didn't write how I felt. I never did. Feelings don't hold up in audits. The rest of the day passed normally. Emails, approvals, a vendor escalation I quietly forwarded to the general inbox. No longer my lane. At 4:48 p.m., a system notification appeared. Your access has been modified. I shut down my computer, picked up my notebook, and left on time. That evening, I walked home instead of taking the train. The weather was cool, predictable. The city moved around me without urgency. Halfway home, I stopped at a small bar I liked. Nothing loud, nothing crowded. I ordered one drink and sat near the window. This was the pause, the moment where nothing happened, and that mattered. I didn't text anyone, didn't replay the meeting, didn't speculate. I simply let the day settle, because I knew something Vanessa didn't. Processes don't collapse immediately. They wait. And when they do fail, they don't look for confidence. They look for names. I paid, walked home, and placed the notebook on my desk beside my keys. Tomorrow would be quiet too. That was fine. Quiet had always been where the real work happened. The next morning began the same way. Same elevator, same hallway, same desk. That consistency had always been important to me. In environments governed by policy, routine isn't comfort, it's camouflage. People assume nothing is changing if the surface looks familiar. By 9:30 a.m., the first message arrived. It wasn't addressed to me directly. A procurement analyst sent a group email asking who now had approval authority for an urgent vendor exception. The request sat unanswered for 12 minutes before someone replied, looping in operations. Vanessa responded 5 minutes later. Please route all approval requests through me for now. For now again. I watched the exchange quietly. No reply from me, no correction, no clarification. Silence, when used correctly, saves energy. By midday, the pattern repeated. A compliance flag triggered automatically. A routine quarterly review tied to a contract I'd managed for 6 years. The system sent alerts to the old distribution list. I was no longer on it. The alert escalated anyway, it always did. Paul stopped by my desk around 1:15. He didn't sit. Hey, he said casually. Quick question. That vendor audit, who's handling that now? I turned my chair slightly to face him, neutral expression. According to the updated matrix, I said, it's shared responsibility under operations. He frowned. Right, but practically, I no longer have access, I said gently. There was no accusation in my voice, no satisfaction either. Just fact. Paul nodded slowly. Okay, thanks. He walked away. At 2:40 p.m., an internal chat lit up. Legal was asking for documentation tied to a pricing clause that had been flagged externally. The request came with a deadline. End of business day. Vanessa was added to the thread. She responded quickly, confidently. Reviewing now. I didn't open the document she referenced. I couldn't. My access was gone. Instead, I opened my notebook. October 13th, 2:47 p.m. Legal escalation rerouted. Deadline unchanged. Responsibility assumed verbally. This wasn't revenge. This was record-keeping. By Thursday, the tone had shifted. Not dramatically, not publicly, but in the way people paused longer before answering questions, in the way emails grew more formal, in the way meetings multiplied. Vanessa called a cross-functional review Friday morning. Compliance, finance, operations, and legal were all present this time. That mattered too. She walked through slides quickly, confidently. Numbers, timelines, boxes with arrows. When legal asked about documentation, she deferred. I'll follow up offline. The meeting ended without resolution. Afterward, I received a message from an analyst I trusted. Do you still have the original vendor exception notes? I replied honestly. No, I don't have access anymore. There was a pause before the response came back. Oh. That single word carried more weight than most meetings. Later that afternoon, IT sent out a notice. Audit review scheduled. System access logs under evaluation. Routine language, standard phrasing. I closed my inbox and sat still for a moment. This was the part people misunderstand. Consequences don't arrive loudly. They arrive with calendars attached. I hadn't said anything. I hadn't warned anyone. I hadn't corrected the process, because the process had already been corrected, just not in the way they expected. That evening I stayed late. Not to work, but to observe. Vanessa passed my desk twice without stopping. Once, she hesitated, then kept walking. At 6:12 p.m., legal sent a follow-up. More formal this time. More people CC'd. The deadline was now Monday morning. I shut down my computer and left. On the walk home, I passed the same bar. I didn't go in. Instead, I walked a little farther than usual, letting the city stretch out. There was no satisfaction yet, no resolution, just motion beginning where stillness had been. And still, I said nothing. Because silence doesn't interrupt systems. It lets them speak. Monday arrived without urgency. That too was predictable. Large organizations rarely panic at the beginning of the week. They assume there is time, that someone, somewhere, will resolve whatever surfaced on Friday. By 9:08 a.m., legal sent a calendar invite. Subject, documentation review. Duration, 30 minutes. Attendees, operations, finance, compliance, legal. My name was not on the list. That omission was intentional, or careless. It no longer mattered. At 9:31, the meeting started without me. At 9:47, my phone rang. It was Paul. "Are you free?" he asked. "Yes," I said. A pause. "Can you come to conference room A?" Conference room A was larger, glass walls, executive floor. When I arrived, the atmosphere had changed, not tense, controlled. The way rooms feel when people are being careful with their words. Vanessa sat near the middle of the table. Legal counsel was present now. So was someone from internal audit. That told me everything. "Jordan," Paul said, "thanks for joining. We had a few questions." I took a seat, placed my notebook on the table. Closed. No one commented on it. Legal began. "We're reviewing an exception granted last year related to vendor pricing thresholds. The approval chain is unclear." Vanessa spoke before I could. "That was handled under Jordan's role previously." I looked at her, then at legal. "Was," I said. "Yes." The word landed softly. Legal nodded. "And currently?" "Currently," I said. "My access and approval authority were removed last Wednesday." I didn't look at Vanessa when I said it. I looked at the document legal had projected on the screen. There was a silence. Brief, but distinct. Audit cleared his throat. "Who holds the authority now?" No one answered immediately. Vanessa shifted slightly. "Operationally, it transitioned to my team." Legal tilted her head. "Is that documented?" Vanessa hesitated. "Just a fraction too long. It's in progress." I opened my notebook. Not to read, to signal. "Would it help," I said calmly, "if I summarize the historical approval structure?" Legal looked relieved. "Yes, please." I didn't editorialize, didn't defend myself, didn't explain why the change happened. I simply described the process as it had existed. Dates, controls, escalation paths. When I finished, legal asked one final question. "And when your authority was removed, was a replacement formally assigned?" I closed the notebook. "No." The meeting ended early. No conclusions were announced, no decisions made. But something important had shifted. Afterward, Paul walked with me back to my desk. "This isn't what it looks like," he said quietly. I nodded. "I know." That was true too. It looked like process failure. What it was absence. By Tuesday afternoon, audit had pulled system logs, approval histories, email chains. I wasn't asked to provide anything. They already had it. On Wednesday, Vanessa called me into her office. She closed the door. "We need to realign," she said. "Some things fell through the cracks." I stood, didn't sit. "I'm open to clarity," I replied. She folded her arms. "You could have said something." I met her eyes evenly. "I did. In the meeting." She exhaled sharply. "You knew what I meant." I paused. Let the silence work. "I followed the updated structure," I said. "Exactly." That was the moment she understood. Not that I had acted, but that I hadn't. She nodded once. "We'll revisit roles." "I'll wait for documentation," I said. That night I walked home slowly. The city felt the same, the noise, the lights. But somewhere behind the glass offices and automated systems, timelines were aligning. Processes were remembering who had been removed and who had never raised their voice. The documentation arrived on Thursday morning, not in an email, in a calendar invite. Subject, role alignment review. Duration, 60 minutes. Attendees, operations, finance, compliance, legal, audit, HR. This time my name was included, so was the chief operating officer's. That was new. I arrived early again, same routine, same desk, same notebook placed beside the keyboard. I hadn't written much in it the last 2 days, there hadn't been a need. When systems move into formal review, they stop improvising. Conference room A was full when I entered. Not crowded, but deliberately occupied, every seat chosen with intention. Vanessa avoided eye contact, not dramatically, just enough to be noticeable. The COO opened the meeting without preamble. We're here to clarify responsibility gaps identified during a recent audit review. No blame, no emotion, just framing. Legal followed, presenting a timeline. Clean, precise, dates aligned with system logs. Access changes highlighted in neutral colors. No commentary, just facts. When my name appeared on the screen, it wasn't emphasized. It didn't need to be. The absence spoke for itself. Audit summarized next. The issue is not a single decision, it's a break in continuity. Controls were removed without replacement. He paused, looked around the table. That creates risk. No one disagreed. Vanessa spoke then, carefully. We moved quickly to adapt to new priorities. In hindsight, some transitions should have been more formalized. The COO nodded. Agreed, that's why we're here. She turned to me. Jordan, from your perspective, is there anything we should understand? I considered the question. This was not the moment for explanation, or emotion, or history. Only that I followed the structure provided, I said, and documented the change. I didn't mention how or where. I didn't need to. HR spoke next. Policy language, neutral tone. A reminder that role changes involving compliance authority required dual sign-off. That requirement had not been met. The COO leaned back slightly. So, procedurally, the transition was incomplete. Legal nodded. Audit nodded. Vanessa did not. There was no accusation, no raised voice, just alignment. The COO closed her folder. Effective immediately, we're reinstating the previous approval structure until a compliant transition plan is reviewed and approved. She looked at me again. Jordan, your access will be restored today. I nodded once. Understood. Then she added, operations will remain involved, of course, but oversight will be centralized again. Vanessa's expression remained composed, professional, but something had changed behind it. Not anger, calculation. The meeting ended without summary slides, without next steps projected on the screen. Those would come later, in writing. Back at my desk, IT notifications arrived one by one. Access restored, approval authority reinstated, distribution lists updated. I didn't rush to open anything. Instead, I opened my notebook. October 19th, 11:14 a.m. Authority reinstated via executive review. No retroactive assignment of fault. That last part mattered. There would be no scapegoat, no public correction. That wasn't how this company worked. Friday passed quietly. Vanessa did not stop by my desk. She sent an email instead. Formal, polite, vague. Let's sync next week to align going forward, I replied with a meeting time. Nothing more. That evening, I took the train home instead of walking, sat by the window, watched reflections slide across the glass. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just a familiar stillness. Over the next 2 weeks, the structure settled back into place. Approvals flowed correctly. Escalations landed where they should. Legal stopped sending reminders. Audit closed the review with a single line. Controls restored. Vanessa remained in her role. Of course she did. Organizations don't remove people easily, they remove risk. What changed was quieter. She stopped improvising. Every request came with documentation now. Every decision routed through formal channels. Meetings became shorter, emails longer. She no longer spoke in absolutes. And she never again moved access without legal present. One afternoon, as I was leaving, Paul caught up with me near the elevator. You handled that well, he said. I nodded. It resolved. He hesitated. Some people might have reacted differently. I thought about that. Yes, I said. They might have. The elevator doors closed. At home that night, I placed my notebook on the shelf where it belonged. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The work was done. Not loudly, not visibly, not in a way that would be retold in hallways, but in a way that would be remembered by systems. And systems, I had learned, never forget who kept them intact. The shift didn't announce itself. There was no memo. No follow-up meeting explaining what had changed. No acknowledgement of the audit beyond a brief line in a quarterly compliance update that most people skimmed. But routines tell the truth long before statements do. By November, requests that used to arrive informally now came with attachments. Approval questions were framed carefully, language softened, phrases like "just looping you in" disappeared, replaced by "per policy" and "for documented review." Vanessa adapted. She always had. She became meticulous, careful, almost restrained. We met once a week after that. Scheduled. Agendas circulated in advance. Notes sent afterward. Everything aligned, traceable, defensible. She never referenced the audit. I never referenced the meeting. That was the unspoken agreement. One afternoon, about a month later, an analyst stopped by my desk. "I heard you used to handle all this," she said, gesturing at a stack of reports. I looked at them briefly. "I still do." She nodded, thoughtful. "It feels calmer now." That word stayed with me. Calmer, not better, not worse, just steadier. Systems prefer steady people. Near the end of the year, performance reviews began. Mine was scheduled with the COO. Unusual, but not unprecedented. The conversation was brief. She spoke first. "Your name came up during the audit." I waited. "Not as a problem," she added. "As a reference point." I nodded once. "We value that kind of consistency," she said. "It's not always visible, but it's measurable." There was no praise beyond that. No bonus announced in the room. No dramatic recognition. Just a note added to a record that mattered. A week later, my compensation adjustment came through. Modest, appropriate, sustainable. I accepted it without comment. By January, Vanessa was leading fewer initiatives. Not because she'd failed, but because oversight had returned where it belonged. Her influence narrowed. Her authority clarified. She remained confident, professional, but no longer unchecked. We passed each other in the hallway occasionally, polite nods, nothing more. One evening, after most of the floor had emptied, I stayed behind briefly. Not to work, just to finish a thought. I opened my notebook for the first time in weeks. There was no new entry to add. Instead, I flipped back to the first page. Old handwriting, earlier years. Notes taken when I'd been younger, quieter, more eager to prove value. Back then, I had written everything down because I was afraid of being forgotten. Now I understood something different. Documentation isn't about being remembered, it's about making sure the truth doesn't need a voice to survive. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. Outside, the city moved the way it always did. Indifferent, efficient, continuous. I walked home without stopping. By spring, the story was over. Not concluded, just finished. That distinction matters. Nothing dramatic followed. No resignation, no transfer. No sudden reversal of hierarchy. Vanessa remained director of operations. I remained where I was, with restored authority and clarified boundaries. The organization moved on, satisfied that the issue had been addressed. That is how institutions heal themselves, not through emotion, but through correction. I noticed something else as time passed. People stopped asking me to fix things quietly. They asked earlier. Formally, with context. They prepared before coming to my desk, not out of fear, out of understanding. I had become, unintentionally, a fixed point again, not because I demanded it, but because the system had tested an absence and rejected it. One afternoon in May, I was asked to mentor a new hire, mid-career, competent, observant. During our second meeting, she asked, "How do you know when to speak up?" I considered that for a moment. "You don't always," I said. "Sometimes you let the structure speak first." She frowned slightly. "Isn't that risky?" "It depends," I replied. On whether the structure is documented. She smiled, uncertain if I was joking. I wasn't. That summer, I took a week off. My first uninterrupted vacation in years. No laptop, no messages. Everything routed through the proper channels. Nothing broke. That, more than anything, confirmed the resolution. On my first day back, I found a small envelope on my desk. No name on the front. Inside was a simple card from the COO. Handwritten. Brief. Thank you for maintaining continuity when it mattered. No signature flourish, no explanation. I placed it in the drawer beside my notebook. That notebook remained with me, though I opened it less often now. It no longer represented vigilance. It represented capacity, the ability to observe without reacting, to wait without disengaging, to let outcomes arrive through process rather than force. People often misunderstand restraint. They mistake it for passivity. It isn't. Restraint is choosing not to interrupt what is already revealing itself. Vanessa and I crossed paths less frequently after that. When we did, the exchanges were professional, efficient, correct. Once, near the elevators, she paused and said, "You're very methodical." I nodded. "It helps." She studied me for a second, then added, "I'm trying to be more intentional." "I've noticed," I said. That was the closest thing to acknowledgement we ever exchanged, and it was enough. On a quiet Friday evening, months later, I stayed late again, not out of obligation, but habit. I finished a review, shut down my computer, and sat for a moment before leaving. The office was quiet in that familiar way, muted, neutral, stable. I thought about how easily this could have gone differently, how tempting it would have been to argue in that first meeting, to warn, to resist, to make noise. Noise feels powerful in the moment, but systems don't respond to noise, they respond to alignment. I picked up my notebook, weighed it in my hand, then placed it back in my bag. Outside, the city lights reflected off the building's glass, steady and impersonal. I walked toward the elevator without looking back. Nothing important was left unresolved. I hadn't won anything. I had simply stayed present long enough for the truth to finish speaking. And in environments governed by process, that is the only kind of ending that lasts.